Well, good morning, everybody. I've got a minute after 8, so we'll go ahead and get started. It's like we've got a little bit smaller group today, but maybe we'll have a few more folks jumping in as we go. Just a reminder, if you don't mind, putting your name and any affiliation in the chat box to help us capture who's here for the minutes. We'd appreciate that. Also, by means of introduction, I'm Ed Keith, Deschutes County Forester and Chair of Project Wildfire Steering Committee. Today, we thought we'd just take a look back. It's been a year since the Labor Day fires that impacted a lot of different communities across the state. So we just thought we'd take a look at that event and maybe some potential lessons learned from that after 12 months has gone by. But first, I'll turn it over to Boone for a short update of the program, and also would remind people, I guess, that if you have any changes to the minutes, please let us know. You could either send it to us by email, pop something in the chat, or just raise your hand and we'll try to call on you if you have a question or changes to the minutes. So with that, Boone, want to start us off with a quick update with what's up with Project Wildfire?
Yeah, no problem. Well, you know, it's been a busy summer this year with our Firewise communities, and I just thought I'd share something that just kind of showing what we've got coming through. I just, you know, I always hit on Firewise, but lately, you know, I've been working with Ross Huffman with ODF. Officially, ODF are the keepers of the of Firewise, but we help facilitate getting that stuff through. So we put together this webpage. Is Trello is what it's called, but each one of these kind of boards are different phases of becoming Firewise, and in each one of these are a card of different communities. So if you start counting these up, I think we're just shy of 20 communities this year that we're processing from interested all the way to completed communities. There's more communities that got completed so far this year than these two, but these just recently got done. So also along that, right, congratulations on Skyliners and Sundance. It's been a while, but since we got them here right front center, there they are. But yeah, so we've been kind of looking through these, and I got them color coded. I guess I'll just open one up for as an example. Got them color coded with what part of the county they're in, and sometimes it's the fire department that I list there so that we know who we're coordinating with. This thing's opening slow. And then, you know, also got the needs attention. So you can just glance at it, and by the color, you know where it's at, if it's in the Bend area or whatever. And then this is loading slow, but we got a checklist of parts of the phase as far as the process where we're at and getting that completed. And then Ross and I are able to kind of put comments back and forth. So if you're working for a fire department and you're on the call today, I don't know who all's on here, but and you see an invite from Trello coming from me, that's because I want to invite you to this board to be able to look at the communities as we're kind of progressing through them, so you can track what communities might be in your district, and moving on across to the completed phase. The Cliffs is really close. Is one of our only Redmond communities at the moment. I think I got one more that I may not have added up here yet, but they're really close to it. They're almost done. I think they had submitted their last final application, and now it's just a matter of getting through the NFPA process. So that's our Firewise communities. It's been decent workload this year. And actually, I guess this ties together with today's talk, because, you know, a lot of this came because of the 2020 fires on Labor Day, and people worrying about the risk of their own communities here locally. And then our CWPPs, these are always ongoing, but just an update of where we're at in that. We've, you know, we went through the Greater Bend. We've gotten to that final draft, and then today I'll have that put together and configured for final signatures. So it's gone through all the revision process, a 30-day, it's been more than 30 now, but a 30-day period out for public review. We shared that far and wide the best that we could, and then gathering any and all comments back. So far, we haven't had too many. I think the plan's looking pretty good, so people are feeling pretty good about it. But either way, likely you'll see, if you're part of that steering committee or on the interest group, you'll see an email come out from me today, just hopefully today, if everything goes right, saying, just saying that we're going to have this being ran around for signatures, so we can get it into the implementation phase. And then I think I'll have to look, but I believe Greater Redmond is the next on the list. I think these are the order that I have these on the web page is the order that they, from the newest to the oldest. So I think Greater Redmond will slip to the top, and then East West will be next, but we'll just keep rotating them around on that page there. And that's about everything I've got for the update. And then Ed, I just kind of wanted to toss it over to you as far as whether you wanted to mention anything with the Fema Grant stuff that we're starting to implement or we're starting to plan for. I don't know if you wanted to mention any of that as part of the program of work that we've been kind of working together on or not.
Sure, yeah, real briefly, a couple items to share. First one would be just another reminder. I know we've sent out reminders through email, but just want to remind this group as well that we're coming towards the latter part of September. And so at the end of September, on the 30th is when we'll close out or accept our first submittal of grants for our Firewise fuel reduction grants out to communities. There is $100,000 available this year, so pretty significant sum. I just want to be sure that everybody doesn't let that date slip by, September 30th, get those grant applications in. And you should have received at least one email, if not multiple emails, with links to the application. But you can find that also on deschutes.org/grants. That application document is on there. And again, if you have any questions, look us up, the sooner the better, and get those in. And we will be reviewing those really early in October to hopefully turn those results back to y'all fairly shortly. So be sure to get those in if you're interested in doing a fuel reduction project anytime between now and next June. Great opportunity for you to get a little bit of funding to help you out in implementing a project in your community. The second one would be, yes, we have been waiting for a couple years now. We were eligible to apply for a Fema grant back at the end of 2018. And the state has, we're still waiting on the actual final grant agreement, but we're really close. Been working with Eagle Crest. We also have some county property up in Redmond planned for treatment as well. And so we're getting really close to getting actually started on the groundwork on that grant. So that's exciting to finally see that moving forward as well. So I think with that, that's our update on things that we're working on. And with that, I will just very briefly introduce, I guess, our main topic. And I think Boone is going to kick this off with just a little bit of background. We did do a presentation that was focused pretty well squarely on the weather event that led to the Labor Day fires a few months back. But Boone's just going to kind of set the stage for what led to these Labor Day fires, and then we're going to turn it over to Nathan Garraby, our emergency manager, who did spend a fair amount of time over there working these at least a couple of these fires as well. And with that, we'll turn it over to Boone.
Yeah, thank you, Ed. And I apologize for getting about the Firewise grants. I had that down and didn't even say it. Yeah, if you guys need help on those, let me know. So the Labor Day fires, we had John Saltenberger back, I think it was in April, if I remember right. And that recording, if you wanted to see it in detail of that weather event, that's there and recorded on YouTube, and then it's on our website. The link is. Yeah, and this GIF, I love looking at this thing just because it's fun to look at, and we're going to see it a couple times here. So just as a refresher, right? These fires they happened. The greatest amount of spread happened between September 7th through the 9th there, and they burned massive areas of Oregon. And I've grabbed this graphic off of a research paper just because I thought that it really kind of illustrated the point of, or the magnitude of kind of the impact of these fires. So you can read that piece, but the gist of it all is, if you look across the bottom, 36 years of fire history. I'm sure if we went 37, it'd probably upset the graph, but 36 years of fire history. You combine all the acres that were burned within the Cascade Range, on the west side of the Cascade Range, they wouldn't tally the number of acres that were burned in those few short days, the 7th, 8th, and 9th. So those fires were quite significant, right? And that sparked a lot of information, or a lot of interest from the community, rightfully so, because of that impact. And as we go through this talk also today, just to kind of keep it framed up, when we're talking about these fires particularly, I'm going to mostly be talking about the west side fires. We didn't really have much of anything on the east side. We had a couple smaller ones, but west side fires. And we'll talk a little bit more about the fuels, but just remember that it's quite a bit different than what we have here. They're not the high frequency, low intensity fires. These are more of a low frequency, high intensity fires. When you think about them in natural terms of the fire regime that happens over there. So as a refresher, you guys have seen this slide before, a very similar one. We kind of have two different fire triangles that we think about for fire. One is the one on the left there, and that's just fire in general. That you have to have those three things to have combustion: oxygen, heat, and fuel. All right. But the one that we were going to focus a little bit more on today will be the one on the right, the fire behavior triangle. And when we think about behavior, thinking about things like intensity, flame lengths, spotting distances, rates of spread. So thinking more about how that fire is acting, or as it says, behaving on the landscape. And the three inputs to identifying the way that it behaves out there is weather, topography, and fuel. So right, the weather is that ambient conditions of the atmospheric conditions around you, around the fire. Topography, so we're going to think about what the slope is, canyons, drainages, canyons channeling fire or channeling winds, saddles and stuff, kind of funneling those winds and speeding them up, and kind of those effects of the fire. And then the fuel, of course, is thinking about what's burning out there. Any live vegetation, or any vegetation in general, live or dead, is considered fuel for wildland purposes. So So I kind of want to start with the fuels and the season timing on when this fire occurred, right? So this is, I pulled this off of the internet, off of ODF's webpage. It tracks along with the season conditions across different areas of the state. And just to kind of identify where we are, we're looking at the red line, which is 2020. And it's, you guys hear me all right? Okay. Okay, so it's 2020. This is kind of where we're looking at for a time period. We were ramping up in here, and we're right in the middle of that line when we're ramping up. And this is ERC. So let me just quickly slip over to this one right here. So I just pulled a random area. I believe I pulled right here, which is the South Cascades unit, which lines up with the Lion's Head and that Beachy Creek fire. So we're looking at their ERCs, energy release component. So that's a number that represents, for the most part, represents the energy that's released by the fuels when they burn out there. So as the fire season goes on and it progresses, and we have high temperatures, low RHs progressing through the summer, our fuels become drier and drier and drier. And the more dry that they are, the more available fuels they are. So our ERC continues to increase as we go through that fire season. And so we were getting pretty close to kind of the peak of what our fire season was looking like. We were really adding up to really dry conditions. If you think about a plant or a tree out there in the landscape, you know, it starts off early in the summer. It goes through this little spot across here where it's nice and flat. That's during green up. So the plant's sucking up lots of moisture. It's kind of you know, it's that full turgor is what they call it anyway, but it's pumping as much moisture as it's going to pump. And then it begins to dry out and it hardens off. So green up ends and it begins to harden off. And then we see things just trend up as the summer goes on. And that's where we were. We're late summer, things were hardened off. It was quite dry. So not just the dead stuff was available to burn, but the live fuels out there were also available to burn and acting as if they were, you know, burning as if they were dead fuels. And another way of looking at this is by 1,000-hour fuel moisture. I'm not going to explain what 1,000-hour fuel moisture is, but it's a nice indice to look at that also trends the fire season. You know, and keep in mind the black line is the average every year. This blue line was 2019. And then when we look at this red line of where we were September 7th, you know, we were setting record lows. You know, this stuff was well below, or we're about to set record lows. We were well below what the average was. And we continued on down into the first part of September as those east winds continued to dry us out. So we were extremely low when we think about the fuel moistures out there and some of our larger fuels, and then also that ERC as far as that energy release component. So we were setting the stage for some pretty significant activity. Let me get back to my slide here. And then, you know, if you listen to Saltenberger when he talked about the east wind event, you know, some of the things that he pulled out or the things that he stated was, you know, east wind event is not in itself is not a rare occurrence, right? We have east wind events all the time, and these are this is actually from an article that a paper that he put together and sent over to me, talking about these east wind events and predicting them and talking about when they occur. But these are two of the main patterns that we generally see that creates these east wind events. And the one that we really want to look at is this top one, right? We have some kind of high pressure or some kind of pressure anyway, and it creates this pressure gradient east to west. So over here, just like contour lines on a map, this kind of like the top of a hill, if you will, everything wants to run downhill. So we get these east winds running from the high pressure into the low pressure where this like trough is here of low pressure. So high winds across there, and the more lines we put between it, the faster those winds are. And his, you know, when we did the actual when he did the actual modeling and was looking at what was happening on those Labor Day fires, it was quite significant. A lot of isobars in between the two that were showing that gradient, how steep it was, and how quickly those winds were moving. And that, you know, and a lot of times these east wind events only happen for a day or two when they do happen. But in this case, it happened for several days. We had east wind that was sustained for a while. But so we're kind of putting that together, right? We're thinking about east wind events, but we had a east wind event of great magnitude late in the season. We got lots of dry fuels out there. I put this slide in. This is from a class I used to teach, but it's, you know, it's just showing the more isobars that we have between the two high to low, the faster the wind is. When there's just a few, we have low winds. When there's high, more, we have faster winds. And then another slide kind of illustrating that point as well, but this is illustrating it in a different way, right? That kind of adds to it. Whenever we have fires out there, one of the things we think about is how stable the air mass is. Does it allow for the column to lift up large or not? And the way that we had that set up with the high pressure going to low pressure, a lot of those fires that happened underneath more of a low pressure and was allowing for that instability in the atmosphere. So we had really strong winds. We had air pushing across from the high pressure to the low, and that low was lifting off, so allowing for some column buildup. So we were really starting to set the stage. So there we are, high pressure to low pressure, lots of gradient lines, and the wind was coming. So the wind on the topography, so thinking about that fuels, topography, and weather. So we did talked about the fuels and the weather, but the topography, and think about the crest of the Cascades. This is pretty common, the top left scene here, that we would see wind coming across the landscape. And then where we have ridges and stuff, that wind gets a little more compressed, so it speeds up as it's kind of hitting the faces of those ridges on that windward side. And as we go to the leeward side, we get eddy effects and stuff where that wind is a little bit more swirly. So if you lay fire on this, or imagine this to be a column of smoke transporting fire brands, so embers, you could picture very easily that you would be dropping embers into those low places that are dead air spaces. And then the fire would be burning up the hill. And then when it got exposed to the wind, higher on the slopes, especially on that windward side, it would be racing. It would be quite the fire behavior. Big rates of spread, large flame lengths, putting more and more embers into that airstream, and then dropping them further downwind. So thinking about that fire behavior that was moving across the landscape, right? I think oftentimes when we hear the picture of it moving across the landscape and being like a fire that's moving, and we talk about rates of spread, most times we think about it in the terms of like a fire front moving, but often, and especially this case, it wasn't just the fire front, but we were also, this was setting up for that, for long distance spotting. So we were throwing embers, or the fire was throwing embers out ahead of itself, starting new fires. So it's not just that fire front moving, but it was also these new fires that were starting right in front of the fire. And those were burning together almost immediately. And then they'd be racing up to the next ridge and blowing on over. The other thing that was kind of adding to some of that wind speed was this bottom right picture here, funneling of wind. So it's basically a Venturi effect, right? As the wind is being compressed down into some of those smaller gaps and saddles on the crest of the Cascades, it was really lining up to really start to move wind quickly. So all of that was setting up to eventually get to this, right? Fast wind pushing through those gaps, pushing that spread. And what I kind of wanted to show, and hopefully this works. If it doesn't, I'll get right back out of it. But thinking about the topography, the alignment of wind, slope, and some of these fires. So we're zooming down here to the Lion's Head fire. It had been burning to the east for a fair amount of time as well. But once we turned around and we had that east wind, we were suddenly looking down the barrel of these gaps where we're getting a lot of Venturi effect, where it was funneling that wind through, and then we were coming across into canyons that were loosely east-west or largely east-west aligned, which allowed for that fire to really blow down, right? And you think about it blowing down through these canyons, and again, hitting some of these spots that are ridges, and then that eddy effect, and we would end up with things like spots, right? So we end up with spots here and there that were picked up. But that was kind of the same scene that we saw everywhere across all these fires, not just Lion's Head and Beachy Creek, which was this guy here. Beachy Creek did the same thing, lined up with a lot of those drainages and ran. But that was happening all along the Cascades. So kind of to summarize all of that together, right? We were late season, very dry fuels. We had a east wind event, and it wasn't just any east wind event. It was also an east wind event that was of great magnitude, and I was working with a meteorologist over on the coast at the time. We had that Sweet Creek fire by Florence. It's not on this map, but we were finishing that one up, and we were talking about it, and it was interesting. He's a really good meteorologist. I don't want to take anything away from him, but it was without knowing him, you would think he didn't think it was that significant, but we would talk about the wind event that was coming, and it wasn't just that it was blowing lots of wind, but it had lots of instability with it, and it was going to be bringing some really high temperatures to the coast. So we were given briefings, and and he just says things very plainly the way that it was. We were talking about the east wind event. He says, yeah, and he's briefing a big crowd of firefighters, and this wind event is pretty significant. Yeah, some meteorologists say that it's like a 50 to 100 year kind of event to have it this time of year. And it was, I thought the guy was great. Like, he was really good at recognizing it, but the emphasis wasn't there. And then, we talked about it more, and I did my spiel of the briefing to the firefighters for fire behavior and talked to them about, if it gets moving, you need to step out of the way, because it was getting beyond kind of what was really in the modeling, and also beyond kind of what my own experience had seen as far as pushing a lot of these fires. It's like, I did not expect to see the amount of fires moving across the landscape. And actually, I'm getting a little sidetracked from where I was originally headed here. But either way, it was interesting to see, when so I'd left that fire on Labor Day. I think it was on the 7th. I left it in the morning, and I drove back home, and then and I knew these fires were all going to move, or at least the ones that were existing that I knew about, but I didn't know how much. And I think that was a common feeling across most all of the firefighters and fire managers on the landscape, because it was getting, it was pushing the envelope of what was out there. We had those dry fuels, we had this wind event, and then we had existing fires on the landscape. And some of those were in very complex terrain that were inaccessible. The Beachy Creek is a good example of it. If you hadn't seen it, there's that, I'd sent out a story map to the Beachy Creek fire that kind of walks through all the different things they tried as far as accessing the fire and keeping people safe and still being able to suppress it, because everybody knew that somewhere on the horizon was going to be an east wind event. We just didn't expect it to be this magnitude. So anyway, I left the fire, came back home myself, and then the next morning I got up to see what was kind of going on. It was a day off for me, but pulled up all of the different resources I had to kind of look at where the fire had moved to, looking at heat signatures and all of that. And I was looking at it, and I was having a hard time believing some of it was right. And then I got a phone call from one of the regional fire planners, and I can't remember what he was asking for, but I asked him, I was like, well, how far do you guys think that it moved? And he's like, we were thinking Lion's Head might have went 170,000 acres last night. And it's just like, and that was somewhat mind blowing. I was like, whoa, I was picturing tens of thousands of acres. And then when it was all said and done, I can't remember precisely how many acres we had burned in Oregon, but it tallied way more than what I was expecting to see. And that was a pretty common theme when you talk to some of the fire behavior analysts that were working on this. They're like, yeah, we were preaching that this was quite the wind event. It was going beyond what our models were showing. It was lining up pretty much everything that we knew, and we weren't sure how far, but for the most part, there was a lot of surprise in how far it actually did move. And I guess one of the other pieces I want to kind of say here is we're thinking about the west side and this east wind event and kind of the way that this works, right? If we think back to the Tillamook burns, those were hundreds of thousands of acres over here. And those fires were also east wind events. And I know that they were, a lot of those were a pretty good magnitude of the significance of those east wind events, but those were very much so the same kind of pattern that we would have saw when these kicked off, except they just had existing fires on the landscape. So I believe a lot of I don't remember what those were caused by, but right, that burned off some big pieces. There's a few things go in there thinking about fuel loading and fire return intervals, but you've got to have pretty much all those things to align to have these big fires on that west side. I'm gonna get off of that. Okay, so that's kind of the setup before I turn it over to Nathan there. But yeah, large fires. We had existing fires on landscape. We had a significant weather event planned. We were late in the season with lots of dry fuels. We had terrain that was set up that aligned with those winds to promote large fire growth, and atmospheric conditions that also allowed for tall towers and that smoke to kind of clear off, right? So as you look at this slide, you can see that smoke blowing away and fresh air continually feeding those fires. But I think with that, actually, I got a couple slides I want to show. I don't know how I was skipping these before I turn it over to Nathan. Right, so I just thought this was a cool picture to kind of show what that looked like from the ground. Huge column bent over with all that wind, nice clean air feeding it from the east. The other side of this, right, is all the interest that we've got from the communities, whether it's a whole community effort or individual homeowners calling. There's been a lot of questions about fuel reduction, what I should be removing around my home. And I've heard people say, it doesn't matter what you do, that fire was going to take those homes out regardless. And right, I got to continue to carry the flag, right? That's not true, right? We can do things around our homes, right? When we look at these homes that burned up, we can see a lot of the vegetation that's still standing. It wasn't the vegetation that burned them down. It wasn't a flaming front that came across. It's still the same thing we preach. It's that those embers landing in some kind of receptive fuel bed, the wick to the house, if you will, right? There's, you look in the background, these trees are still standing. They didn't burn down. they would have been available to burn as well. If you cut them down, piled them, they would have burned just fine. But, you know, they were clean underneath them. These houses likely had needles in the gutters or stacked up around them. You know, this is another good picture of these trees that are burned. They burned because the homes burned next to them, not because the tree caught the house on fire, but because the house burned the tree. And we see that kind of everywhere. Lots of green trees still standing. As you get away from the houses, there's more and more trees still there. If you're up next to the houses, a lot of those trees are gone because the heat from those houses catching on fire. That's even true here, right? So hopefully I don't show anybody's house or anything here as I'm going through these, because I know that can definitely be sensitive. And then sometimes I think I get callous to it without realizing what I'm doing or saying. But you know, and nobody was immune to it. And I guess my last couple of slides are kind of that, right? As it was both fire departments, ODF, everybody had, it impacted everybody because no one was expecting that kind of behavior. And, but when we really look at it, we can still think back to like, well, what do we have around our houses? Was it the trees or was it something else, some kind of wick sticking out? Okay, that's everything I got. Nathan, I'll turn it over to you to jump in here. Let me stop sharing. Actually, I see, Greg, you have got a question. I guess maybe I should pause for questions for a minute.
Yeah, Boone, I was just wondering, how much of this do you think is climate change versus what's normal? Or is there any difference there?
You know, there's been a lot of people asking this, and it's always one of those subjects you dance around. I'll say this, east wind events like this were common in the past, right? So so for our western forests to get to that 100 to 400 year fire return interval, which a lot of them sit at, right? There's places in the valley and places, right? I don't want to say that indigenous peoples didn't burn, but there was lots of that going on as well. But a lot of these forests were quite old. And then for them to exist that old, and then they likely existed that old, and then likely an east wind event similar to this would have happened and then burned off giant, you know, watersheds at a time where that stuff would be gone. So I would say that the east wind event was still a natural phenomenon. What I would be curious of is like how often those are occurring, if that begins to occur more often. And that might be a little bit of a sign towards that, but that's definitely outside of my wheelhouse for the most part.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. And Dean, you got your hand up.
Yeah, Boone. I'm recalling when we had the meteorologist talking about these events, that he was saying that when he went down to Australia and they had the outrageous fires there, that they came up with a whole new alert level, catastrophic alert level. I think they called it Code Black. And I know Nathan's coming up, and I thought that was something that we might need to do for messaging for a worst case scenario. Thanks.
Yeah, it'd be an interesting one. I think it'd be fun to dive into the data to try to identify when that would take place. Boyd, did you just, I thought I saw your hand come up, but maybe not. Oh, okay.
I think that was an accident.
Yeah, okay, not a problem. Well, Nathan, if you're ready, I'll, I think I stopped sharing. No, I did not. I'll stop sharing and give that over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Boone. Always fascinating to see the fire behavior component of these events. And Dean, to your question, I don't know that I'll address it in the in my presentation, because but I think that's probably a conversation we need to have nationally. You know, that's kind of along the lines of, you know, the national cohesive strategy and some of these discussions, but, you know, certainly have a significant local input. The risk is, you know, we could have these events often enough that we would issue a potential, you know, warning, and people, you know, then an event, it wouldn't transpire to be, you know, a big catastrophic event. And so, you know, we need to be really careful. And I think probably aligning just probably education around what red flag warnings mean and some of these critical fire behavior environments mean. But that's a good question. I mean, I know that's been tossed around a few times, and I see some validity to it. But I think certainly needs to be carefully constructed and really deliberate in how we as a response and planning community would roll that out. But that's a great question. I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to just tell you right now that I'm not as technically proficient as Boone is with stuff. So I kind of had to cobble together a PowerPoint that just kind of showed, what I was trying to relay. And I think I'm going to focus mostly on the human component. But as Boone said, we had a number of large fires out in the state on the landscape in that early September, but a couple really, probably of most significance. We had Beachy Creek and Lions Head, on actively burning. I think both of those started in mid-August. I believe both from lightning events, but don't quote me on that. And so here we are prior to September 7th, and we had those two fires going. But on September 7th, we had this wind event came in, and so September 7th was the Monday, and at about just before 7 o'clock, the 242 fire kicked off down in Klamath County, and then at about 8:20 or so, Holiday Farm kicked off, and then at just before midnight, Echo Mountain Complex kicked off. And then going into the morning of September 8th, Archie Creek, at least it was reported. That's down in the Umpqua, down in the Umpqua River drainage, just east of Glide, I believe. And then a late morning, just before noon, the Alameda Drive fire started, and then the South Oba chain just a couple hours later, both of those in Jackson County. And then later that afternoon, Riverside. So that really just kind of goes to demonstrate that over about less than a 12-hour period or a 24-hour period, we had a lot of large fires start. And I think I did the math. Cumulatively, those fires ended up burning just over 750,000 acres. And like Boone said, most of that activity was in, that September 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th kind of range. So I'm just going to kind of go back, as I think there was a bit of foreboding that weekend, that Labor Day weekend, and this is just an example of a lot of public information that was going out. The Weather Service was certainly sharing, information about this weather event. They referred to this, the Pendleton Weather Service, which is the weather service that serves our area, not the west side of the mountains. That's out of Portland, and then Medford has an office which covers Southwest Oregon. But Pendleton Weather's referring to this as a high-end fire weather event. I think, I don't know what Boone thinks, but kind of is like, I don't know that anybody really knew exactly what to call it, but they were describing it. And if you read the description, you certainly get the point that there was significant potential. And so this was a post that our office put out on September 6th, so Sunday, just broadcasting that weather service event or that weather service post and encouraging people to register for alerts. The reality of it is if these fires escape initial attack, being able to get a hold of people and getting people out of the way is probably the most important thing we can do at that point. So, we were really focused on getting people to register for alerts. I actually was scheduled off on September 7th. It's Labor Day and Labor Day weekend. Usually, if things allow, try to spend some time with the family before everybody goes back to school. And on September 7th, I opted to work. I knew that there was going to be some activity that day, and I think most of my peers and a lot of folks, I think we were. As a general rule, everybody was trying to staff up or at least be prepared for this event. My family actually said, well, you're lame. We're going to leave and we're going to go to the beach. And so they left that morning or early around noon that day. And they actually traveled through Detroit and Idana and Mill City, and then Otis that day heading to the coast. And so it's, they literally traveled through those communities just hours before they were impacted. But we were pretty prepared. This was a fire that was down in the Deschutes Rec home sites area off of Spring River Road. This was about 5:30 in the afternoon on September 7th, and it was pretty windy. This was actually caused by a lodge pole into a power line, sparked that fire. And we were responding. We were actually, and this is not typical, was actually on the phone with dispatch and the patrol watch commander, drawing the polygon for the evacuation for this event, just because we were knowing that there was potential. Fortunately, the fire stayed on the ground. The wind kind of blew it into the road, and really aggressive initial attack caught it real quick, and it ended up being a non-entity. Excuse me. So sorry about that. So going into that afternoon, we were all kind of wondering what the day ahead was going to bring. So I'll get back on my screen here. So fast forward a little bit. It's about 9 o'clock. I think for the most part, the wind had kind of subsided in our area enough. About 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, I went home. I ended up going to bed, stayed up a little bit, went to bed, was woken up by somebody from the state fire marshal's office over on the west side. About 2 o'clock in the morning, I got a phone call saying, hey, both Mackenzie River drainage and the Santiam Canyon are both on fire. And there's a lot of evacuees. We don't know where they're going. Basically it was like, it's just kind of like all stuff was breaking loose. And Warren said, hey, there's probably a lot of evacuees heading your way. So I got up, and first thing I did is I texted a couple of my peers, one of which was the Lynn County emergency manager, who's since retired. But I texted him, I said, hey, are you doing okay? Anything you need? And he sent me back this picture. And this is actually in Mill City. So this is actually fire in Mill City at 2 o'clock in the morning. And, I obviously I was like, oh, wow, that's something, and so, contacted our patrol division and had our Sisters patrol deputies head into start checking parking lots. And they did. They found people at gas stations ran out of gas. They found people in the Ray's parking lot, Bimart parking lot, and Sisters. They basically just fled east. They didn't know where to go. And so coordinated, got some reader boards out, and directing people to the fairgrounds in Redmond. And we set up a temporary evacuation point from about, we got it open about 3 o'clock in the morning or so, and went, started receiving people. And I was actually a little shocked at how many people just started kind of just rolling in. I mean, it was people in RVs, people in cars. Some of them were a little shell shocked, but we were able to get the Red Cross there, and they were able to start at least caring for people. About 5 o'clock that morning, Joe Larson here, who sent me this picture, texted me or called me. I think he called me and said, hey, we have a lot, we can't get to the east side of this fire at all, and we're really concerned. There's probably a lot of hunters up in the woods. Would you be able to help us by evacuating? So we rallied some search and rescue teams, and I took 3 or 4 teams over to the west side, and we started evacuating the backcountry of Lynn and Lane counties. And so again, just looking for hunters, checking the camps, both designated and dispersed camping areas. And so, hadn't heard anything from Lane County at this point. But once we got to the Lane County line, we thought, well, probably it would make sense to just continue all the way to Mackenzie Bridge and just kind of keep doing what we're doing. In that part of the state, there's really little to no cell coverage unless you can get up on High Point. We had no radio contact with anybody. We're completely kind of operating independently. And so we made our way to Mackenzie Bridge. And I took this picture when I got there, And this was actually kind of looking, this was from Highway 126. So this is a little before noon. This is looking kind of southwest from that intersection of Mill Creek Road and Highway 126. And I just kind of took a picture of the smoke up on the hill. That fire had actually started just east of here. And if you're familiar with the basketball academy is, it was kind of backing right up to the basketball academy. So these businesses right here, there's a hotel across the street, Dakota's and the gas station market here were kind of the edge. They were just outside the fire perimeter essentially. And then it had burned, a lot farther than this, but it clearly had burned a long ways up over and was on those ridges and burning. And this was kind of the way it looked on both sides of the McKenzie River Valley there. So showed up and kind of just staged my SAR teams back at the ranger station, and I drove into McKenzie Bridge just to get some situational awareness. Since we were so close, see if anybody needed anything, and found the command post here in front of the market here, and my counterpart from Lane County was actually in the parking lot. She actually is from that community and essentially was also cut off herself. And so she was doing a lot of coordination right there from the gas station. What we found was there was no fuel. The gas station, because there's no power, and the phone lines and all the cable and all the telecommunications infrastructure was destroyed. They had, not only did they not have power, but they also didn't have, even if they did have power, they wouldn't have been able to use the pumps to charge fuel. So there's really no communications. I think at that point, I know at that point, a significant radio site that served Lane and Lynn counties, I believe, had been destroyed already. No power, no fuel. They had really limited resources. I think there was a couple Forest Service engines. And again, I may not have a full grasp of this again. So, but there was significantly not enough fire resources. There was a task force from Lane County that had come up the night before and basically were in that community, protecting the community. A number of responders and members of the local community. At that point, it was obvious that had either lost their homes or likely had lost their homes. And it was just a real unfortunate situation to stumble into. I was able to use my satellite phone and call home, essentially call back to the office and get authorization to continue to support Lane County. And what we found was, again, just they were doing the best they could. And I want to just be clear that phenomenal work and phenomenal decision-making was going on. It was just one of those situations that, there wasn't a lot that could be done. So we were asked to assist in the evacuation of McKenzie Bridge and Blue River community. Some of it had already burned or had been directly impacted by fire, but the whole community was at risk. There was one map book that we could get our hands on, and obviously, my counterpart had the map book, and we didn't want to take her map book, so I took pictures of all the relevant pages of the map book, and on my phone, and I'd airdropped them to all my teams. And we basically had made evacuation assignments based off these airdrop photos of the map book. There was no connectivity. Again, my satellite phone was really my only link back to Deschutes County. Made some calls requesting some additional resources, checking in. I think my satellite phone got used a few times by other people that needed to make some arrangements. And eventually we did get a satellite device up on loan from City of Eugene. They got it up here. I think they had to travel around through Sweet Home, up Highway 20, back, and then back down to McKenzie Bridge. But that certainly helped. And it was pretty popular. Everybody was standing next to that thing, connecting, calling home. Some of the other things we found was that wind event, not only did it cause fires and take out power lines, but it took trees down across almost every road in McKenzie Bridge and Blue River. So a lot of the evacuation routes or routes that you would, if you needed to access fire or defend structures or to get people out, were completely blocked by a large number of big down trees, power lines, power poles. And so we made a call. There was no resources to support clearing these roads. So again, made a call home, and Chris Doty from our county road department and a number of his crew came up, and they showed up in force. I mean, they came with a bucket truck, they came with saws, and they cleared the roads all over Blue River and McKenzie Bridge that afternoon and into the evening, and really made a big dent in getting some of these evacuation routes and routes that opened up, so just to improve general safety. I just kind of want to fast forward a little bit to October 9th. So we set up what we call a mini mark, or a multi-agency resource center here in Bend to support the evacuees. And so this is a month. I took this picture not knowing at the time how significant it was. I took this picture, and this family we got to know over the months, particularly my teammate Haley Rich, and they were actually staying in a hotel in Redmond for, I think, about 9 months, and until they ended up moving out of state and getting a home and a job. But it just goes to show that for every acre burn, there's a human story aside, adjacent to that. And this was a pretty cute family. We actually helped them with a birthday party for their little boy. He loved police officers. So any chance we get a chance, we'll try to help out. And so that was a pretty special day. I just kind of wanted to highlight some of the things we did. Obviously, we stood up that temporary evacuation point. We supported evacuations in Lynn and Lane counties. We did that route clearing thanks to the road department. And then, we supported, I don't have the numbers in front of me, and I wish I'd have grabbed those before the presentation. It was well over 200 people. I want to say about 200 to 300 people over the course of that, of those events, from 8 different counties. So we had evacuees from Jackson, Klamath, Douglas, Lane, Lynn, Marion, Clackamas, and Lincoln counties, all in Deschutes County, in 2 or 3 different hotels that were being supported by the Red Cross, and we were working with them and their each individual county to try to connect them with services. We did also provide emergency operations center support for Lane County. For the first week, we did that initial response to the first couple of days, and then over the next week or so, we were doing quite a bit of virtual emergency operations center work supporting these displaced populations. And that next weekend, we kind of made the call that, Lane County needed help. They needed some depth in their EOC just because they had a lot going on. And so we went over to help spell them, but we also made it as an opportunity to kind of combine our efforts. And so we did a lot of our work directly from Lane County, kind of taking advantage of opportunities to do both jobs in one spot. And it was really much more coordinated. So myself and Haley Rich spent a week over there. The second week we spent over in Lane County, and then the following week, Ashley Volz went over and stood in as a planning section chief in their emergency operations center. So just trying to give them some support, but also it helped us better serve the people that we had displaced in our county. Also at the same time, as a county, we provide law enforcement support for both Lane and Jackson counties. I think the sheriff's office and Bend PD did about a week or a little over a week in Jackson County, backfilling their deputies. Their deputies were, obviously exhausted, shorthanded. And so both Bend Police Department and the Sheriff's Office we rotated, I think, 4-day periods down there, I think for 12 days or something like that, down in Jackson County, supporting law enforcement activity in and around those fires. I know the road department also sent some additional support to Jackson County. And then we also, for about a month, into early October, we coordinated all law enforcement activities for Eastern Lane County, and that was through an agreement between the sheriffs. But essentially, Lane County, they were, these fires kind of cut off the east end of these valley counties, and so we were able to just support them by we actually set up almost like a substation in Blue River to support Lane County for a little over a month, and the sheriff's office is primary on that. But we I think we received assistance from Bend and Redmond Police also to meet those law enforcement needs. And then we've been continuing, and obviously that's subsided quite a bit, but recovery support for multiple counties. I kind of wanted to just on that note, I wanted to mention that we talked about the acreage. Those fires combined for about 750,000 acres, 9 fatalities. And as of March of this year, there were still over 1,400 people in sheltered or sheltered persons in 5 hotels and 746 hotel rooms. 25,000 people had registered for individual assistance through FEMA. And I think at that point in March, there was $34.7 million approved for support for those. And at that point, they'd removed over 21,000 tons of debris from the burned areas throughout the state. So, that's probably just a small portion of what needed to be removed. But, it just goes to show how long and complex and nuanced that recovery is, and how different it is from each community to community. So not every community is going to recover exactly the same. Just a few key takeaways is, I think planning for the unexpected, we do that by building systems and capabilities within our, our intellectual capital, and building good systems to be able to adapt to circumstances that we couldn't completely plan for. Diversity and alert warning, I think we put a lot of eggs in a basket of, well, you're going to get a text. Well, the reality of it is if you lose cell sites and you lose telecommunications, that may not happen. And so, building every alert and warning system around multiple pathways of getting a hold of people. And that was born, I believe, when I talked to my counterpart in Lane County, door-to-door warnings by law enforcement or fire, or in some cases neighbors, significantly made the difference in alerting people and getting them out. And it's really hard to measure the negative, but likely limited loss of life. Communication challenges, I think that's a given, right? I mean, every operational after action I've ever taken part in was communication. And so I think we need to again, that goes to building those capabilities and decision-making processes to be able to mitigate some of those communication challenges. The other thing I wanted to point out was just clearly, the scope and scale of this event. When you're having a bad day, another community may also be having a bad day, and that really bore out. Is like there were no resources to send. I heard, I know the Deschutes County Task Force, which probably would have been the most likely task force to come into Eastern Lane or Lynn counties to support him on that day one, I believe was already deployed to Klamath County. Don't quote me on that, but I mean, it just was really short. I saw stories from Jackson County where basically there were no resources to be had. So what they had is what they had. I think the other thing we want to remember is that responders and key personnel will be impacted. And that was certainly the case in Lane County. Is not only are our responders and leaders in our communities subject to just the stress and exhaustion that come with these events, but they may also be personally impacted, and they're members of those communities. So that's important to kind of build systems that could be transferred to if you need to have somebody come in and take over your role or to support you. Look for opportunities to combine coordination entities. There was we did some of that. I think moving forward, that was the one thing that I want to make sure that in Central Oregon that we can do, and we've done that before and we've done it really well. But there were some opportunities, probably some missed opportunities, but But again, under circumstances, I think everybody just did a phenomenal job. Again, I kind of already covered this, is recovery does not look the same depending on the communities you're in and where what you're recovering from. And it takes a really, really long time. I think, we, particularly in the first responder community, and I think probably even just people in general, tend to have a pretty short look on things, right? We go, we deal with it, we move on. What's the next thing? What's the next thing? What's the next thing? And I think these are events that will take years. And a couple things, and this was why, I talked to Boone about actually having some of my peers come over and do this presentation, but I'll tell you that I was sensitive to the fact when I learned this is that, that anniversary is kind of a tough time for some folks. And I think people, so I kind of left them alone a little bit and just kind of got their information as they could give it to me to try to share with you all. So I just think the reality of it is that, these communities will be years to recover, and they may not look exactly the same as they did before. And then finally, I just wanted to point out that, there's a term that I like, and I don't remember where I heard it, but it's just lift where you stand. And so, we didn't know going into that day that, how we were going to be lifting, and it ended up being that we were the temporary home for, a couple hundred people. And so our program and our office and my teammates did a great job of just looking for where the gaps were, looking for what needed to be done and get it done. And, we did everything from, trying to arrange rides for home to people. I mean, so there were a lot of people that refused to go home because the cell towers weren't in place, and they were rightfully concerned that, well, gosh, if another disaster happens, how would they get a hold of me to tell me to get out of the way? And so, month and a half into this, we're getting people home that could go home. And in one case, the only ride we were able to arrange was a couple of our deputies took one of our unmarked vans and loaded a community member up with belongings and got that community member home to another county, because there just was really limited resources, and that person couldn't and probably shouldn't have to try to afford that. So they'd evacuated, they hitched a ride out of town, and so we were able to get them home. But it just kind of just goes to show, you just never know exactly how we're going to be, how we're best able to help. With that, I think that was really all I had for slides. I'll stop sharing. And I think I took all of our available time, so I'm sorry. Yeah, Bill, thanks for, I thought that you guys were down there on that 242 fire. So, that limited some options, obviously, to go into Eastern Lane County, because, we're the closest to them. And that's why we were over there so much.
So real quick, I just thought I would hit a couple of things that you mentioned here. One is the red flag warnings, right? This is only showing Oregon for the most part, but most of the Western states, there's 17 Western states, but pretty much all of them had red flag warnings and multiple red flag warnings across them due to this event. So it was quite significant. And like you said, Nathan, I don't know how you really converse that out to folks better than what the Weather Service did, or in a different way than what they did. It's like you said, you plan for the low frequency, high impact kind of events. I thought I'd share that. And there is another statement you said in there, and I think I like all of your statements because they're always like fun. They spark a lot of thought. When after these fires kicked off, I went up to the coordination center in Portland, worked up there for a little while, helping to prioritize these fires and move resources around. But there was one morning I got up early in the morning to head back up. It's still dark out, and I got into the elevator, and there was a young couple in there. They were mid-20s at most, and they had a little newborn baby with them. And one of them said something, I don't remember what they said, but we had a short conversation in the elevator, and it was basically they had gone into labor on the 7th and came down to the hospital there in Portland, and then that Riverside fire came down towards Portland area. But either way, they hadn't been back up to their place, and it was a good week since then, if not 2 weeks at that point. And they'd been living out of a hotel with a newborn baby, not sure if their home had survived, didn't know how to get back up there. And it was like, man, I wanted to tell them like what I was up to and try to figure out a way to help them. But I was like, man, I just, it's outside of what I'm doing. But anyway, let's share that.
Hey, Nathan, I got a question. Nathan, I got a question for you on that. This is Todd from Deschutes SWCD. Say, with other volunteers coming to help out that weren't from an organized organization, whether it be police, fire department, SAR, whatever, how did you organize those folks, and what would you do, I guess, differently if there was a lot of volunteers that wanted to help out and all?
That's a great question and perplexing. I don't know that anybody's ever figured that out exactly right. Just give you a little bit of insight is one thing that we've identified as a real need is really a strong either volunteers or community organizations active in disaster. And that's kind of an organizational model that really falls, it plays with the government, but it's not government's to own. And there's good reasons for that. Is one, governments have to be awfully careful. If we, quote, sign somebody up as a volunteer, we own them. We also own their liability. And there's an expectation that if you show up and you're identified with Deschutes County, that there's a certain degree of vetting that goes on. And so that's one big challenge. The Red Cross does a phenomenal job of doing that. So typically what we try to do is we try to turn them towards existing organizations when at all, if at all possible. So, people want to call up and, hey, I want to give stuff, or I want to give my time. We, lots of times it's like, well, hey, the Red Cross pays for a lot of hotel rooms. If you'd be interested, that's certainly a good way to make a donation. They're also always looking for volunteers. There's also each community has existing volunteers, but as it kind of plays out is we typically coordinate with these folks and try to turn them to existing organizations. And what happened in Lane County, I can speak of, was there was a lot of stuff got donated, and in almost every case, stuff is not what anybody needs or wants. But it's really difficult to communicate that to people because people really just want to help. They don't know how to help. And so that's what they can do is they can go in their closet, find some clothes and give those away. And what we found is as communities, we struggle with these events, like the whole community, right? I mean, we're all this vicarious trauma. And some of the ways that we feel better about it is we serve others. And so we want to certainly direct people to serve others, and we want to help them, but we want to help them do it in the most meaningful way. And so what I try to explain to people, and again, this is something I learned from my teammate Haley. She's really enlightened me a lot in this. She should probably be talking about this, honestly, but when you've been a survivor, the opportunity, you don't necessarily want somebody, and you're thankful. I got to think that they're thankful for whatever they can get, but the opportunity to give a cast card and to go buy their own clothes or their own underwear is probably a heck of a lot more dignifying and supportive than just, picking through clothes. Now, that being said, help is help, and everybody wants to help. So really trying to organize those. In Lane County, they had 2 sites set up. They had a site down in Eugene, and then eventually we helped get a site set up at the community center in McKenzie Bridge, Blue River. And the county actually hired somebody to literally go up there and just kind of be the traffic director, because people were showing up with all sorts of stuff. And, I think it was one of our local companies delivered, pallets and pallets and pallets of water. And there's all this stuff, and they needed ice because nobody had power. And, so that we kind of tried to set up these little distribution centers up in that community eventually. And I think that, again, I kind of was transitioning out when that was kind of getting stood up finally, or it was being realized. But, that was kind of a way to try to manage that traffic and really trying to educate people how to best. So, and I don't know, David, do you have anything extra from the Red Cross perspective? I know that was kind of a long-winded answer, so.
You basically said what I was going to say. The Red Cross does anticipate that, and we have this, we call them event-based volunteers. And we actually encourage that because sometimes it's a pathway for volunteers to become long-term Red Cross volunteers. It's their first exposure to what we do. So we do try to incorporate them into our disaster response. And so we're happy to provide that service.
Thanks, David.
Thanks.
Greg, you've had your hand up for a while. You have a question?
Yeah, the question was, Nathan, you were saying that there was gas stations that didn't have power and they also didn't have communication, so they couldn't get gas out to anybody. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And,
Yep.
and so what I was wondering is, are they getting, especially those outlying gas stations, they should have maybe electric generators, but then they'd also have to have satellite capability because the cell towers aren't working. So is that something they're working on or what?
Yeah, there's been a number of preparedness initiatives around fuel. We know from the Cascade, planning around the Cascadia event, that's going to be one of our biggest struggles. We're going to have these allocations of fuel stuck in the ground, and there's different strategies around getting fuel out of there. Now, obviously, in a Cascadia scenario, probably more likely than not, the state or some other government agency will come in, pull that fuel, track it, and at some point later reimburse that gas station for the fuel that was taken. In this situation, that just really wasn't practical. They did work, and I think it took them, I want to say it was about a month, and they got them up online. But in the meantime, what we did was, and I forgot this on our slide, is we actually supplied fuel for all the response agencies in that community. So we took 2 fuel trailers, one with diesel and one with unleaded, and we parked it at the McKenzie, or the Upper McKenzie Fire District. They're just there in McKenzie Bridge, and we parked them there. And then we coordinated with our fuel supplier to refill them, and then we kind of worked that out with Lane County later. But that's just an example of you kind of have to sometimes just figure out how to solve the problem, and so that was kind of our short-term answer to that. But yeah, I think it's always a great opportunity to remind every business, if you think of continuity of operations, what does it take to keep you in business? And in almost all cases in today's world, it's power and connectivity. So you're looking for ways to build redundant paths. Now, you have to be able to build that into your business model and be able to afford it too. So, there's always that. But examples of what we've done, there's grants out there now for card lock facilities to get to wire in transfer switches. So maybe you don't need a generator, you just need everything wired in appropriately, so you could bring in a generator, plug in, and be able to run the pumps. And so there's a number of card lock facilities in the state of Oregon have taken advantage of that grant program to build that capability.
Okay.
All right. Well, thanks, Nathan and Boone. I think it's important to look back at those significant events and learn what we can from them. With that, and just a few minutes left in our meeting here, we do have a relatively small group, but I would just ask if any of y'all have an update to share. If you just want to either raise your hand or just come off mute. Like I say, we don't have a huge group, so just offer a chance for roundtable updates, and I'll start with Jeff since you have your hand.
Good morning. Yeah, Jeff Amaral. So formerly with Bend Park and Rec District. I want to let everybody know that I've moved on from Bend Parks. So I'm here representing Starwood HOA now. So Starwood is a development north of Bend off Tumalo Road between Highway 97 and Old Bend Redmond Highway. We've been working on fuel reduction projects the last couple of years and trying to improve our defensible space. And we've been removing trees and limbing trees, and that's going to be ongoing.
Great, thanks, Jeff. David.
Just a couple of things from the Red Cross. After a long pause, we're restarting our campaign to work with local communities to install free smoke detectors. And this weekend, we're going to be canvassing the West Side Pines Co-op in West Bend, knocking on doors on Friday to see who might be interested in having a smoke detector installed. And then we will work to make that happen on Saturday. And with, of course, COVID protocols in place. We're just happy that we're able to get out and do that again. The only other thing I would mention is there's a lot of activity, obviously, nationally with ongoing fires and hurricanes and so on. So there are a lot of Red Cross volunteers deployed around the country. Just wanted to point out that there's been what we call a fence put around the Pacific Division. So volunteers in our area are not going to the East Coast or down to Louisiana. They're staying within our division, so they're available for any ongoing activity in the Northwest or in California. That's all I have.
Great, thank you, David. Anyone else that wants to share an update? See a few folks in the chat saying they don't have an update, but
Hey Ed, I got a update not related to the presentation.
Oh,
okay, Nathan, and then we'll get to you, Dean, after Nathan.
Okay, perfect. Hey, I just wanted to highlight, some of you may have been seeing some information out there around ORAlerts. ORAlerts.gov is a new website that the state put together after the state entered into a statewide contract with Everbridge. So ORAlerts is basically a cooperative agreement where the state is now paying for our mass notification system through Everbridge. And so if you see information about like, hey, you should go to ORAlerts and sign up for notifications, it basically takes you to Deschutes alerts. So it's the same system. They've added some capability and you know, we're continuing to refine and improve our local mass notification system. And thanks to Chris Perry and his team, they do a phenomenal job on that. But so just in case there's any confusion, ORAlerts and Deschutes alerts, same thing. You don't have to have two different registrations. We do encourage you to go in and sign up either through either one of those websites, because it will take you to the same sign up or update page and update your profile or sign up if you haven't already. And then we are looking at adding a few additional needs categories in there. So when you sign up your profile, we're looking at a few other categories to include that people can notify and let us know if they have any additional needs. And then, yeah, I think that was it really. I was trying to message Chris, see if he wanted me to cover that or if he was, but so I just jumped in. So sorry, Chris, if you have anything to add, go for it.
Nothing for me, thank you.
All right, thanks. Dean, I think you had an update, and I'm seeing like three of you now, but hopefully one of you can unmute and give us an update from the UDRC.
yeah, thanks. I have pretty poor bandwidth out here, and I've had to reboot about 4 or 5 times. Thanks, Boone and Nathan. Those were great presentations today. And for the UDRC, we've maxed out again all the monies that we reserved for defensible space. We've done a lot in that area this year. And we've gotten more grant money from the railroad for communities near the railroad. And we've got some more grant opportunities that are coming up. So it looks like we'll be able to continue our defensible space programs into next year.
Yeah, that's great news, Dean. Thank you.
I got a quick one. You know, Craig Letts is sitting quiet, but Ed and I stumbled across a YouTube video of the good work they're doing out there on Discovery West, which was pretty awesome. You know, building the new places with all the defensible space concepts in mind. And I just put a link to that video in the chat. I was pretty stoked when I saw it. I was like, wow, that was as good, if not better, than any presentation I've given to a community.
Hey, thanks for the credit there, Boone. I really appreciate it. It's been really fun. I will say that, you know, I've been working with Tree Farm for a long time, and I'm working with Westgate, and those are really interesting. And there's lots of defensible space in those two subdivisions because they're larger lots. So Discovery West brings with it a whole new set of challenges because there's not 30 feet of defensible space. So the way you think about providing that, protecting those homes when you have those really tight side setbacks is really quite different, you know, and there's not a lot of information out there. So it's been really fun. It's been challenging, and it's just rewarding to see that we're taken some steps to try to improve our situation here and be very mindful of what fire mitigation measures we can put in place. So thanks.
Thanks, Craig. Yeah, I would encourage y'all to take a look at that video, especially the emphasis on with the smaller lot size, the first 5 feet. I ran across a couple Discovery West videos, and the first one I saw wasn't really focused on defensible space, but of course that's what I focused in on visually, and the rock mulch instead of the bark mulch around the homes was really stood out to me as it's nice to see a community built from the start with that instead of having to remove all that flammable material as we are in a lot of communities. So really good work there. So, all right, last call. Anybody else that wants to share an update? You just want to come off mute, or otherwise, we're just about out of time, and we can just call it a meeting. Okay, seeing none. Thanks everybody for joining us today. Hope you enjoyed the presentation. And again, this last reminder that grants are due next week on Thursday. If you're from a community that wants to think about proposing a grant project, I'll look forward to getting those here in the next week or so. And with that, everybody have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.